that I was just like reminded of the other day is it takes like something like 2 tons of rock and ore and earth to get 1 ounce of gold. I feel like that's the same inner process of purification, or it's symbolic of a similar process that takes place in our own inner alchemy. And so something that is also helpful to be reminded of is that Hatha Yoga, which is the foundation for all postural yoga that we practice today, but also is a much deeper science than is often seen on the surface. Um, Hatha Yoga comes from the tradition of Tantra, which and is kind of affiliated to Ayurveda as a result of that, which is a process of alchemy. It's an inner alchemy that we're talking about. And so working with the Hatha Yoga practices that are a little bit more, you could call them esoteric, or they're just not as commonplace in the world of yoga today, for whatever reason. And I think that part of the reason is because when we start to work on the inner alchemy that this practice promises us, and we start to encounter the parts of us that are denser, and the parts of us that are of yeah, more of the bondage. We start to encounter our limitations, and that's really what Hatha Yoga is designed to do, is to bring us to the limits of our senses, so that we can start building a real relationship to the supreme reality, which is beyond the senses. Because this is an ineffable, indescribable phenomenon that we're all a part of, and it's called reality. It's called life. And the word supreme reality is just like a concept that can helpfully kind of point us in the right direction, but it's also indescribable. And so the only way we can get to know it, and the only way we can start to map this cosmic experience that we're all having, is we can start to approach the limits of our personal perception. And I think that the regular practice of going and approaching those limits allows us to then have like I said, a more real relationship with life, a clarified relationship, as you said, Rick. And so I think, yeah, I just start by like kind of saying that and like laying some of the philosophy out. Because then, now when we're working with fire in the body, we're talking about, as I was saying, the enzymatic activity, but that's like one of the physical manifestations. You can think of like your body's producing so many billions of enzymes all of the time, and an enzyme just quickens a metabolic process. That's what an enzyme does. It speeds it up. And that's the exact same thing that fire does. When you put a log on the fire, it speeds up the molecules so that it starts to release the chemical bonds that are holding things together. And so just to think about that for a moment, that's taking place inside of our organism. Right now, that's taking place on a molecular level. And so to increase or to balance, probably is a better word, the fire element in us allows there to be a more even burn in the places where it needs to be burning. Because sometimes if anyone's ever experienced the imbalance that can happen when you feel or perceive fire element as too high or too low in our body, then there's the consequences of that, of course. Like, you guys can fill in the blank for what that means. And just to give an example of what I'm thinking, and I think if like my fire element is low in my body, then my willpower or my ability to confront life and to like digest my experience is low, it's gone down. And if my fire element is balanced, or it's working optimally, then I have more of a hunger, more of a capacity to digest and take on life. And so therefore my will and my ability to exert my personal power has increased. And this is where I think that the relationship to the psychology and the chakras is really interesting, if you guys have studied that. A couple different ones. I like this one, but chapter 3, verse 57, it's describing Uddiyana Bandha, and it says that pulling the abdomen back in and making the navel rise is Uddiyana Bandha. It is the lion which conquers the elephant of death. And so that last line there, it is the lion which conquers the elephant of death. And this bandha, Uddiyana, means flying upward. And it's talking about the upward movement of prana in the organism. And so, I think about, all right, what if my awareness is trapped down here in the lower centers, and I'm kind of stuck in these areas, but I can somehow, in my body and in my mind and in my subtle body, I'm able to draw or lift or direct that energy upward. Then what takes place in my life? What happens? And what is the result of that experiment? And so that's the premise for today. Hold the breath out. Be aware of the weight of your body. Relax the weight down to the tailbone. Inhale from your tailbone. Vam, rum, yum, hum, om. Hold the breath in, tongue up, eyes up. Draw the belly in. Notice what happens when you draw the belly in. Exhale from the third eye. Hum, throat. Yum, heart, belly's drawing in. Rum, solar plexus. Vam, hips. Lum, tailbone. Hold the breath out, draw the belly in. Try this 2 more times on your own. Inhale from the tailbone. This area here, when it starts to develop, there's a subtle the lifting, and it doesn't need to be like a strong thing, but it opens up the ability for the lower half of the body, and especially the legs. And you can feel it when you're working the legs in those asanas and those vinyasas, because that's how we get the fire element to circulate in the body. And getting the fire element to circulate in the body is how we get a more even distribution of the burn, so to speak. And it's very similar. Like the sacred geometry of yoga is so fascinating and it's very real, and it has to do with the positioning of your body and the joints and so the postures, but also how you're breathing in the postures and what you're doing with these subtle inner mechanisms. Because it's like you're basically making a fire, and a fire burns more evenly when it has a certain geometry to it, versus everything kind of being all like squished. You know what I mean? It won't burn as evenly or as hot or as bright, and it takes longer to burn the same amount of material.